G'day guys. I've tried saying this in about 7 other different ways, so there's no other real way of doing it other than being candid. After, I don't even know how much work, Duskbowl Season 1 is finally finished. Literally the day before my birthday. I have no words how much fun this has been, and how thankful I am for all of you, and how thankful I am for Rom and just everyone. Your support has been amazing. If you enjoy Duskbowl, if you enjoy this final episode of Season 1, you can help Season 2 happen by going to our Indiegogo, which will be linked in the description and the pinned comment. I can't stress enough that that is really how Season 2 is going to happen. And yeah, if you want to see it happen, help us out. I'm so thankful for all of you. I've had so much fun doing this. And now let's crack on to the last episode of Season 1 of Duskbowl.
Hey boy, don't lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? In the pines where the sun don't ever shine. I shiver the whole night through. Hey boy, where will you go? I'm going where the cold wind blows. In the pines where the sun never shines. I will shiver the whole night through. Hey boy, don't lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night?
Compass stood before me. Long grass twisted around it, and much of its old brick was overgrown and cracked. Through its empty doorway was an endless pool of black. It was like the gaping mouth of a monster. I held Marshall's recorder tighter and walked in. Have you ever been in an abandoned building? Well, they trigger something that I can only describe as primal in you. It's a sort of hyper-alertness. You breathe softly and you take light steps, making sure to keep an ear out for anything that could be considered a threat. Compass was no different. Its long, empty halls echoed with every step, and I found my eyes darting about, keeping me ready to run. I walked past several nurses' stations. Psychiatric hospital. The words circled my head. What happened here? Why was a hospital so far out here? Dated computers sat alongside dust-caked books on the desks. I opened one, It held records mostly, full of patient names and their corresponding room numbers. Interesting stuff, to say the least, but useless to me. Rubbing my eyes, I cursed the dark. It was so hard to see. I wished for a torch, but of course I didn't have one. I couldn't stop thinking of just how unprepared I was for this. I was amazed that I hadn't died of exposure in the Neverwood, and the thought of starving to death still hung over me. Well, I couldn't exactly go supply shopping in between running from the cops and entering a forbidden forest. I feebly tried to justify it to myself. I would have sold my soul for food and water at that moment. I scratched at my mosquito bite. I felt it and, puzzled, looked at it. Yet again, it felt bigger. I know scratching makes it worse, but this was excessive. I sniffed it, and sure enough, it punged. An infection, I reasoned, as if my day couldn't get any worse. I hoped that this place had a locked supply closet of paracetamol hidden away somewhere. Do drugs have an expiry date? I hoped not. My headache was still throbbing, and if I couldn't eat or drink, at the very least, I'd want some Panadol. After a while, I lost sight of the way I had come. It was like the deep black had swallowed it up. I wanted to run back and find it, but I knew that answers were somewhere in here. And they were close, so I ran my hand along a nearby wall and let it guide me. Deeper. Every so often I'd accidentally kick an old syringe or stumble over some debris. I'd freeze every time. Could something have heard that? Is it going to know where I am? I thought, every time. My heart would drum in my ears as I quietly panicked, but every time, nothing happened. Many of the halls were empty, same for row after row of doors lining the walls. They had names printed on them. They were hard to make out in the dark, but there was something unsettlingly familiar about them. Caroline Noon, Madeline Brooke, and Derek Pierce were all examples. I tried to think. What was familiar about them? I didn't know anyone with those names. Did I? I rubbed my temples and shrugged. It was a mystery for later. I can't tell you how long I wandered those halls. And I didn't even want to think about how lost I really was. Even if I found Marshall, how would I get him out of here? I shook my head. That was a problem I couldn't afford to think about. I needed every last drop of morale I could muster. Suddenly, cutting through the dead silence, there was a gut-wrenching screaming sound, a sound like a feral animal caught in a trap. It was so loud I had to cover my ears, and it shocked me enough that I fell backwards. My body went numb with adrenaline as I heard the sound of feet shortly after. The slapping sound of bare feet on concrete filled the air, and it was getting closer. I froze, hoping that if I was still and quiet enough, the dark would hide me. I was like a kid hiding under their blankets. At the end of the hall, a shape turned the corner, falling over as it did. It threw itself to its feet and sprinted down the hall towards me, and I don't mean ran, I mean sprinted. My mind was buzzing with ideas to run or to hide or to stay frozen. My heart punched my ribcage as the shape got closer and closer. It was fast. It was only a few feet away from me when my logic finally kicked in. I stood to run, but as I did, the shape slammed into me with enough force to send us both sliding and to leave me winded. The shape screamed and leapt off me. It scrambled to the far wall and panted heavily. It was a woman.
Are you a person?
She shrieked, sounding to be in disbelief. I struggled to speak as I gasped for air.
Are you a person?
She repeated. She was clearly desperate. Yes, was all I could croak. She panted, but eventually let out.
Oh, thank God.
The scream from before rang through the halls again, and without another second, the woman grabbed my wrist, dragged me to my feet, and ran, pulling my dazed body behind her. Wait, I was trying to protest.
There's no time. We have to get out of here.
I broke free and fell against the wall. The woman stared at me, shifting in place, clearly deciding whether or not to keep running. She knelt in front of me.
Listen to me, okay? We have to get out of here right now.
I'm looking for someone. I can't. A sadness came over the woman's gaunt face.
You shouldn't have come in here.
She said softly. Marshall. I said his name more for me than anything.
Marshall?
There was a clear recognition in the woman's voice. I straightened myself and caught my breath. You know him. The woman said nothing, but looked back the way she came. I followed her eyes, and a pit grew in my chest. I have to find Marshall. The woman stared longingly at the way I had come, then sighed and nodded. I don't know what she understood, but there was an air of understanding. She took my hands and pulled me to my feet.
My name's Ellen.
Ash, I said. Can you take me to Marshall? Ellen? Ellen was clearly terrified, but that sadness still clung to her. What was that? Ellen said nothing but took me down the way she'd came. She didn't use the wall as a guide. I don't even think she was really paying attention. This was clearly a route she had walked many times. Her hair was long and knotted. She was clearly malnourished. She wore a yellowing, tattered white smock-like thing that sort of resembled a patient gown. Had some sicko forced her into that disgusting thing? Are you all right? It was a stupid question. She said nothing. Well, nothing to me. As we walked, I heard her muttering to herself. I couldn't make out any words, but it sounded like one half of an argument. I couldn't help but wonder, was she crazy, or had this place broken her? How long had she been here for? I felt like a monster. This poor woman had clearly spent some time here, and I was making her postpone her escape. But I needed a guide, and she was it. We walked in silence. I had given up trying to make small talk, and I was honestly terrified of whatever made that scream. I was trying to keep an ear out for it. It wasn't much, but it was my sole safety blanket. Like the Neverwood, it was impossible to tell the passage of time here. We climbed staircase after staircase and made many turns through the snaking halls. My feet ached, but was that from Companist, or had I just started paying attention to my many days' worth of walking through the Neverwood? Finally, we reached a large, smooth, black door.
Here.
Ellen said lowly. I looked at the door, and back to Ellen. I hugged her, a gesture she clearly hadn't had for some time, as she wiggled uncomfortably in it. And honestly, after everything, I needed a hug myself. Now get out of here. Ellen went to say something, but stopped herself. She nodded and ran back into the darkness. I was alone again, and with my hand in my pocket wrapped tightly around Marshall's recorder, I turned back to the door. Here we go. I pushed it open and was met with a vast empty room. I stood in silent confusion for a moment. Marshall! I called. No response. I turned back to call after Ellen. Perhaps she had led me to the wrong room by mistake. My blood ran cold. It was gone. A wall of smooth black stone stood where the door had been. A shot of pain fired through my head. I clutched at it. I tried to hold back the scream, but I wailed in horror. I clung to the wall tightly, almost hugging it, as if doing so would bring the door back. What was happening? Doors just don't disappear? How could it just disappear?
Ashley Campbell.
A voice boomed from behind me. Even just the sound of it was like seeing an eye person. It was unnatural. It hurt to hear. I turned and saw, well, I'm not exactly sure what. It was like a massive mass of meat, a sort of wiggling, pulsating brain sac that seemed to have attached itself to the walls and ceiling around it with some kind of membranous webbing. My heart felt as if it was burning as my eyes traced over it, but I couldn't tear myself away. What the hell was I looking at? Moving down the thing's massive form to the ground level, I finally saw something familiar, a sick, sort of uncanny familiar. Standing upright and pushing against the thing's thin membrane was the shape of a person, a woman, but she wasn't moving, but her face seemed like if it pushed just a little harder, it would rip through the membrane. It was hard to tell where her body ended and the thing began. Was she even a person, or was this just one whole thing? She seemed to be seamlessly grown into the mass. There were large, artery-like shapes that too left impressions on the membrane and seemed to grow into where the woman's mouth would have been. Finally, I tore myself away back to where the door had been. I was too scared to scream now. I just desperately clawed at the wall, praying that the exit would come back.
You're finally here,
the voice said. It seemed to speak in all emotions at once, with hundreds of voices at the same time.
Sooner than I expected. I thought you to be lost in the woods for some time.
I could barely whisper. I was breathing so hard, just on the edge of hyperventilating. I barely said.
The children call me the composer. I am the voyeur to all your misdeeds.
I couldn't make out a single tone or mood to its words. They just sounded like that. Words. I don't know where is... There were so many things whirling around in my head that I couldn't decide on what to say.
You're home now,
it said.
You'll finish growing here.
My whole body shook violently. I could barely stand. I felt my hand wiggling and saw that it was what I thought was my mosquito bite. It wiggled and writhed all on its own. I screamed again. I was growing more and more desperate. I scratched at the wall until my fingers bled.
Most people don't make it this far, but you wouldn't leave it alone. So all that was left was to lead you into the Neverwood and risk you finding me. But the risk has been removed.
I wouldn't look at it, but I knew it was referring to the lump on my hand. Why aren't I at risk? I wasn't even sure what I was asking. It felt like I was just reading lines from a script. The composer only said,
Because you're still growing.
What did that mean? What did that mean? Marshall? I said.
Is gone, and he has been for a very long time.
I thought about what the composer had said. He led me. How? I asked. I didn't say anything else, but clearly the composer knew what I meant. How many times had it had this conversation?
The power of suggestion.
Came a familiar voice. I didn't look to see who was speaking, but I asked. Damien? There was a deep rumbling. This wasn't Damien. It was the composer.
I don't control people.
That would defeat
the point.
The voice was no longer Damien's. It had been a long time since I had heard it, but I knew Marshall's voice anywhere. But this wasn't how I wanted to hear it. It was a sick distortion.
Chatterbox.
The composer changed its voice again. It took me a moment to remember who it belonged to, but as the memory flooded back, my screams turned into weeping. No, please, not him! I begged.
You could
You
have
could
turned
have turned away at any time, sweetheart. I can't make you do anything.
In the end, you did this to yourself.
I didn't want to say it. The words sat like a lump in my throat. Dad. I wanted so badly to see him again, to hear him again. The composer knew exactly how to make people crack, and for me, this was part of it. The sadness turned into hot, white rage. I gritted my teeth and turned to the creature. The massive, dark shape of its form towered over me. "Don't you dare touch my memories!" I hissed. "Mock my father again and I'll fucking kill you!" Now I screamed at the composer, not because of it. The creature let out a sound like laughter. The room seemed to shake. I steadied myself with an arm on the wall. Blood was now pouring from my nose and beginning to seep from my eyes, but I held my glare. I had come all this way for answers, and I was going to get them, no matter what. "The flower board," I demanded. "Did you kill all those people?" The composer wasn't intimidated. An eye person appeared in front of me, and I fell to the ground.
I have never killed anyone. That would defeat the point.
It repeated that last part. Why? Then what's the point, I asked, feeling like I had stumbled onto the right question. Finally, I could distinguish a mood, a tone in the composer. It was a sort of smarmy glee.
To watch.
I curled up on the floor with my eyes firmly shut. I looked up to see people standing over me. My head exploded in pain. I shrieked and wailed as my body seized up. As the world grew dark, I heard the all-encompassing voice say,
"And now I'll watch through you."
Finally, I passed out. When I woke, I was lying on the hard concrete of one of Companist's many halls. In fact, I was back at reception. Had the composer let me go? Ahead of me, I saw the doorway to the outside through which brilliant sunlight bled. With the last of my strength, I ran for it. Escape was so close, my mind was buzzing. Once I left this place, I could use the map to get back to Jamie's camp. From there, I could rest up enough to make the journey back to town, and after that, I would be on the first bus out of Duskbowl. I could get some authorities to come back. I could bring them back here. There was a hard crack on my face, and I fell back. I was seeing stars. I held my head. What the hell had happened? The exit was right there. It was right in front of me. I could see sunlight and the Neverwood beyond. I tentatively reached outside to feel the warm sun on my skin, but was met with cold stone. It was a wall. It wasn't real. I fell to my knees and hopelessly punched at it. Companist was the composer's playground. I was at its mercy now. Or had I been all along? I thought back to what led me to this place to start with. My predestination. I'm alone in here. I spent the last of my energy trying to find another exit. But there's nothing but this hallway now. I'm lost in this place. I want to go home, but where is that now? I don't know anymore. I left my home behind a long time ago. Where is Marshall? 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 Where is The skin over the lump on my hand has begun to split. Inside, I can see an eyeball, frantically rolling around. I want to go home.
off today, I want to give an absolutely massive thank you to my beautiful, glorious patrons, Lady Nevermore, Skulk Queen, Catherine Gordon, The Curator, and Stephen Stevens.